So one of the things that Xmatter asked me to come out to do is to really talk about what we've been doing at Splunk, when it comes down to DevOps. And one of the topics that I always like to bring up is really focused around pipeline design. And so I was kind of doing this as a joke, but DevOps pipeline that matters, X matters. So just have a little fun with this topic. As you guys know, great introduction, thank you. I've been doing this for a really long time. People at Splunk call me the unicorn because of the fact that I've been able to live through every type of job within IT and survived it all. And also, it's also helped me build a better personal relationship with myself and understanding what my capabilities are, and then also helping customers understand it. One of the things that I like to do when we have these discussions is really just kind of highlight and baseline what Splunk is. I'm not trying to make this a vendor pitch, but just so you guys understand why I came to Splunk and why I'm doing this from a DevOps perspective. As you guys know, we've been known as a log aggregation company. We collect all types of logs, either API, stream. We have universal forward technology, but we pull from all these different ecosystems to build a common platform. And what that really entails is really bringing everything together. So if it's infrastructure, if it's operations, if it's network, if it's a build pipeline, everything is packaged in a way that customers can get insight into it from a siloed approach or from a correlated massive scale. So for some of you, who are using Splunk today, you may have a single use case, here and there. But for a lot of our customers that are going to the DevOps approach, they're focused on how to build these correlations together. How do we use this to actually better understand our developer behavior? And one of the things that I did as a personal goal, and I talk a lot about this because this is a very emotional thing for me because it's one of my pet projects, is helping teams build better software. And it's more than just building the right technology stack or building a way of delivering software into the wild. It's about building better people and how to actually enhance their careers. Really what it comes down to as well is Splunk allows you to basically build its framework into your application stack, into your people, as well as provide visualization and integration layers. So this just kind of gives you an idea of, when you think of the scope of integrations that Splunk's able to do, we provide a lot of different extensible layers and interact with the system from a alerting mechanism to also pre-active stance in restarting services as well. So when we think about it, there's a lot of things that DevOps engineers, release engineers, SREs are focused on. And it's around planning and making sure that things, when they get developed into the solutions, they're actually being done in a certain process. So as many of you guys know, if you're following this specific workflow, there's a way to actually manage your workflow in understanding what's necessary, critical, and then also, what are things that are going to be used and ongoing. So the ideal is, we have a project management system like Jira. We're able to manage epic stories, sprints, and specific subtasks. And this information can be correlated to what we do in our code. So it could be an application, it could be a configuration change, it could be something that specifically affects your environment. And then it builds a process where we are able to pass back and forth between a project management team, a developer team, and then also throwing it over the fence and giving operations the peace of mind that we've actually worked through this process. And when you go through this whole process, it's actually really nice when you can take data from specific tool sets, drop it into another tool set, correlate it, drop it into a pipeline, interact with different teams, and then ultimately when it goes to operations, we get full visibility into what's being released in the environment. Then we get into the whole success, fail methodology. So as we were talking about earlier in the session, these are things that, as a team we're dealing with, on a daily basis. So think about all the times that you've had to open a ticket and close a ticket and then reopen it and close it. All this information trends over a period of time, and if it's something that's ongoing and repetitive, if you use the data portion and actually pull from these specific tool sets, you can get visibility into how things are actually behaving in your environment. It's one thing to understand, P1, P2, P3 incident, but it's another thing to understand the relationship between when someone did something to the point that it got to a P1. And this is really important because when you think about all the integrations that you can specifically do in a platform, And specifically from a team perspective, there's a multitude of different ways this path can go. One of the things that I've done in the last couple of years is really focus and highlighted on all the different ways that every tool set, regardless of what vendor it is or regardless of how anything is actually interacting with your system, is being able to map out the process. So the process, ultimately, when you actually have it set up correctly, can help you mature your team and actually build a better functional group. The next thing is really around like understanding the process. How do we automate it better? So this is a common discussion that we have with a lot of customers. It's like, do you want to boil the ocean or do you want to start out small? When you boil the ocean, you actually lose a lot of control of how the process is working. So the ideal is when we go ahead and go through this process, through a traditional developer cycle, we're pushing code into a repository. The repository kicks off a webhook that it can instantiate a build, or it could actually merge into another branch. This information is very critical in the fact that if you're boiling the ocean, you don't actually put any testing process involved in it. It's basically just throwing something over the wall and then hoping it works. It's based on luck. In this process, when we look at all the different components, we can actually very methodically understand that developer teams have a certain process that flows a certain workflow, and when we feed that data in and actually give it insight in specifically these team members, we're actually able to get better insight into how the operations is going. And so this is a very simplistic approach when we talk to customers. We're automating the team commits to Bitbucket, we're understanding the Bitbucket to Bamboo relationship, and then ultimately this becomes a data source that you can use to actually build your environment. Next thing is around the teamwork flow that delivers. We've, as part of this agility conference, we're talking about how teams can interface with each other. So it's a very similar approach, taking that same concept of what happens in our master branch, how does it transverse through our workflow, and then ultimately, when it hits production, are we confident enough that it's actually something that's stable and that we're happy with? One of the things that I've actually done, is from a customer's perspective in understanding how people react to changes is understanding two different methodologies. There's a thing called systematic availability, where a system tells you that you're doing great, everything is up and running, everything's stable, this is what's happening in your environment. Second is what we call user-reported availability. What is my customer sentiment when I make those changes? Because you can have 100% SLA in your environment, but if half your customers can't use your platform because you made a simple change where they can't click a button, that actually reduces your availability within the customer aspect that they can't use that application in a more stable manner. So that's really why I have this team workflow that delivers, is because of the fact that you have to be very methodical when you actually build this design, so that when things are happening, you know why things were changed, and then you have a process to either backtrack it or actually analyze root cause analysis around it. One of the things that I've done at Splunk is I've really focused around this concept of gamifying the DevOps experience. So we talk about how it's not just about developers' operations, about how the company interacts as a global team. One of the things that I do from a company's perspective is I actually look at very unique use cases. So one of the things that we did last year was focus around how Splunk can be used as part of a gaming platform to analyze not only business metrics, system availability, but also understanding the underlying process of how did the developer react when he made that changes, how long did it take him, and then also build a process so that we would provide feedback as the developer is making change. Specifically in this case, one of the things that we've really focused around, when we demo this specific app, is actually showing people that when you make a subtle change as making a game a little bit easier, a little bit harder, customer sentiment is actually being able to record it in real time. And you'll see in the scoreboard, we actually have a way of aggregating the details, seeing who's using the product, how long they're staying in that product, and then actually analyzing this information so that we can tell our developers that based on the last change that they did, we've actually had more interactivity within our environment rather than the change that we did before. So being able to control regression testing, being able to understand what the technical debt provided in the last release, helping build a better product, letting the business know how we did, and then also marketing can use this data to actually help us build better feature sets. One of the things that when we were building this is developing the method. So one of the things I love to do within my team, we're a very small niche team within the Splunk corporation, is actually instantiating what we do for our customers. So it's not just about, hey, Splunk does this is a marketing thing, this is all wow and good. I actually spend time and actually teach customers how to code correctly to instantiate how we actually bring details into the platform. So this is a very important process because when we actually understand how companies are building software, we can help them build a better relationship with their customers, with their vendors, and then also we provide a way of providing a single platform that shows all these specific variables. And as you can tell, we actually are a very heavy user of Atlassian, so we do follow the build process from an Atlassian perspective. The next thing is really around hands-off deployment, full automation. One of the things that I've done specifically around when I did OpenStack development was really understanding the behavior and the customer reaction, not just basically logging into something, making sure something's up, but understanding the reaction time when someone clicks on something specifically. What is the end result? And so we actually did this in the game demo where we're actually building this game in real time. We're showing them what that interaction. So from the time someone clicks the login button until the time someone actually interacts with the game, what is the computer or the analytics platform like Selenium is going to tell us that, based on this interaction of click here, click here, click here, these are response times, and this is what actually happens when we make these changes. And so this is actually a really cool way of using some code logic, taking some background information around simple development process, and then bringing that data into Splunk, for example, and actually getting insight. So one of the things that I also like to do is we help customers get to that full CI/CD deployment methodology. And so as you're going down your DevOps journey, there's a multitude of different ways to take a look at how we actually bring all these components together. I always like the fact that when we talk about how we do these classes and how we build these applications, it's actually in essence dogfooding your own technology. And so you'll see that through our process, we were actually able to take a look at all the different story points. How many story points were completed based on the sprint that we had set up? How was our build environment interacting with the way we're doing our code commits? How do we actually look at our verification steps? What happened specifically in that moment when we actually push something out? And then how do we actually do our deployments? How often? And how often was it actually being successful throughout the whole process? So these are the things that, when we talk about taking baby steps, I like to look at specific things that are problem areas for customers, and then ultimately taking all those specific things and linking them together. And that's really powerful when you think about all the different ways that you can actually take a data-driven approach and actually building a pipeline that actually makes sense to you. And then really what comes down to it, we talked about multiple ways of communicating in our last discussion. We were even using HipChat in this specific example to actually correlate the details of anytime a project was changed, anything that specifically happened, when a project was closed, and then notifying the team that even if they weren't actually part of the development stream, they understood what we were doing, and then ultimately when we released the feature set, they understood why we were doing it as well. And with anything, it's really understanding the monitoring strategy. So now that we understand how that pipeline build, it just doesn't stop there. We're not just focused on that developer's view. We don't want to just focus on the operations view, but we want to see the people who are actually on the frontline support. So we have our support engineers, we have our testing QA teams. How do those guys interact in a way that it's not a finger-pointing game, but it's more about looking at the data process and bringing that detail in so we can drill down and see what the problems are. And so in this case, regardless if it's a microservice or if it's a physical VM or if it's an application that you're working on a third-party tiered service, there's a way to collect the metrics in a way that we can bring all the data, monitor everything, and then we can actually look at why things are failing rather than guessing. One of the things I really love to do is I like to really make everything very simplistic. So the whole ideal is when I work with customers, I discuss, we whiteboard a lot of things. Sometimes a whiteboarding exercise just gives them a glimpse of what is possible. This was actually a use case that I worked with, really focuses around a COTS platform, so a commercial over-the-shelf product. And they were doing release basically on specific services customizations. And what's really nice is we were actually able to interface the vendor into the change that we're making. We're doing testing based on what we're providing within the build pipeline. But we're able to share this information freely based on what we're trying to provide. So the ideal is, it's a very simplistic build, test, run cycle, but being able to correlate these details together, we can see and we can repeat this process over and over again. So as we're iterating different versions, all this information gets fed in, we're able to analyze it, and then over time we can see if our process needs to be fixed or we need to pull components out. And in this case, this financial tech, the most important thing for them was actually trying to get out of their ITIL process and move into a more agile process. So this helped them mature their cycles. This use case, I actually talked at our conference last year. It was with AAA Insurance, and helping them understand how their legacy build platform works. So this company was that Frankenstein, waterfall, agile release, and the information, is being fed in a very similar way from a traditional agile shop. But the ideal was helping them understand where the processes are working, and then taking that same approach and showing them how to do a full continuous integration strategy to help them build a better product. AAA Insurance is one of my more favorite customers because of the fact that they've actually openly said that we need to change our process. I don't know how many of you guys are still using SVN. I mean, I see it quite often in the field, but they're really focused on how do we take this legacy software development lifecycle and move to more agile, more Git flow type of situation, and then taking that information and actually keeping it in the same format. So this was a really fun project I got to work on, and it actually shows a different way of looking at things, but also keeping that same process. And then overall, based on what we're doing, we're publicizing all this information, we're sharing use cases, and there's a multitude of different information. So one of the things that our customers are passionate about, and as well as our internal employees, they're focused on helping customers get successful use cases and being able to bring value into the platform. So the ideal is, we have a multitude of different blog entries that talk about real use cases. We have a developer side dedicated to how you can build your system within our ecosystem. And then also, when we talk about the extensibility of how we bring that stuff into our platform, there's a multitude of different ways to do it as well. So with that being said, thank you for giving me the time, and if you guys have any questions, let me know.